Hey everybody, it's March 9th. We got some snow in Manchester.
Can you believe it?
Can you believe it?
It'll be gone in a minute.
But it'll be gone in a minute, and it's only 8 days, as I like to remind my friend here who claims some Irish something,
Just a little.
to St. Patrick's Day. And then on March 27th, we have the great St. Patrick's Day parade back in the streets of Manchester. So there's lots to look forward to, folks. And we're going to have a great program for you tonight. We have the Executive Director of the World Affairs Council of New Hampshire, and we want to talk about the mission of that fine organization. And we want to talk about particularly what we're all concerned about with the matter of world affairs is the invasion of Ukraine, the biggest land war we've seen in the European continent since World War II, an absolute open military invasion. And there's so much to talk about there, and we want you to participate by calling in to us, as we always look forward to 640-3091.
Start with 603 now.
I got to start with 6. You know, we had a tremendous uproar. Remember when they were going to split us into two different area codes? And there was a whole huge uproar.
Just a whimper.
And they make us dial an extra 3 numbers. Nobody says boo when they do it. I don't know. Anyway,
I've been protesting. I don't dial them.
That means you don't talk to many people, right?
Absolutely. Simplified my life.
I love that protest. Well, I'm going to indulge myself a little bit here, folks. This week, New Hampshire lost a great citizen and one of my personal heroes, one of my dearest, dearest friends, the Honorable Rennie Cushing, state rep from Hampton. Rennie Cushing. You know, I guess this won't work, will it? This won't work. No, this won't
small,
work.
Bob.
Too small. Well, I have this card, which is on my refrigerator, and I see it every day, and it shows Rennie Cushing, 1976, marching along the old rail line, which went right through the Seabrook nuclear plant site, with his soon-to-be wife behind him, Jeff Brummer, who's also passed away behind him, and right next to him is a guy carrying wearing a knapsack and carrying not a sleeping bag. What do you call those things? Roll up thing. Named Ron Rick. These are the people leading the first of many, many protests at the Seabrook nuclear site, which became the largest scene of civil disobedience in the United States since the Vietnam War. And at one point, these demonstrations were increasing. The first one was 18, the next one was 1,800, and then it ratcheted up to 180, I should say, and then up to 1,800. And they were all arrested. Many of them arrested for trespassing and cast into temporary jails and armories here in Manchester, Portsmouth, Dover. And Rennie Cushing was a huge, huge part of that. But I have to say about Rennie Cushing, he lived a life that I'm just in awe of. In addition to his activism on that issue, he founded something I became very involved with called the Campaign for Ratepayers' Rights, to protest asking the electric customers to pay for the plant before it was providing any service. He spent a year as a member of the Atlanta, Georgia sanitation force on the back of a garbage truck. And during that year, he was the only white person in the entire force in that role. He also decided to see the country, so he jumped on freight trains in Portland, Maine, and traveled all the way to Vancouver. He saw the country without ever paying a ticket. And he would get busted, and he'd get on another train and go on. And he was an awesome guy. I just learned when I was at his wake yesterday. A wake was not a huge event because it was by word of mouth for family and friends only. But he also was he worked in a gold mine in Ontario. They had his miner's hat there. And
wow.
they said when you came out from that job,
I'm
you had
not
to,
surprised because it's Rennie Cushing.
You had to be washed down to see if you had any gold dust on you. I mean, what an incredible life. And he left behind a wonderful woman, his wife, who's in this picture, marching behind him and looking at him, by the way. and 3 wonderful daughters. And one of the last things they did for him was to, I mean, he knew he was very, very sick. He had prostate cancer. He had gotten to stage 4. And he had decided not to seek to reach the pinnacle of the goal he wanted, which was to become Speaker of the House, but to instead stand down. But his oncologist told him, "You may have enough time to do that if you think you can do it." So at the last minute, when another candidate who was the sort of the establishment candidate had been the majority leader, was already in the race, he stepped in, threw his hat in the ring, and he won. He won this, and he almost made it. He almost made it through this term. It's a 2-year term in the State House, as you know, and this would have been his second term. It would end at the end of June, but this not being a budget year, it'll end well before that. And up till the very end, he was the leader of the House Democrats in Concord. But his greatest achievement, as you know, was leading the fight to end the death penalty in New Hampshire. That was his greatest achievement.
Achieving the victory.
And achieving the victory.
Because that was
and to achieve this victory, he had to do 2 things. We had to do many things. He did many things. The first thing he did was to put on an incredibly strong case. He brought up people who'd been on death row, but had released when they were exonerated. They would have been, if the execution had gone forward, it would have been an egregious, wrongful death executed at the hands of the state. One was a gentleman from Maryland. He brought in people that were fighting this fight all over the world. But the real thing he did was, this can't be a partisan issue. I will not permit this to be a Democratic issue. That would be the doom. And so he ended up with a lot of Republican votes. And when he passed this thing finally, Governor Sununu vetoed it. Now, Governor Sununu, the real miracle. It takes 2/3 vote to override a veto. Governor Sununu vetoed, I think, over 100 bills in his 4 years, more than any other governor. He was only overridden 2 votes. One was a kind of a minor thing about homegrown marijuana, if I'm not mistaken. The other was the death penalty. What a legacy this man has. What a legacy. What a proud thing I do, call him my friend. And I just, you cannot have a life better lived than Rennie Cushing. And he was humorous, he was fun, he was knowledgeable. I mean, he dug up the fact that the first governor in the United States to call for the abolition of the death penalty was a Governor Badger in the 1840s. I mean, just astonishing guy. And he never went to college. He didn't have a college degree. Well, so think about that, everybody.
He attended the College of Life and took extra credit courses.
He took it. Oh, that's a wonderful way to put it, Mike. Absolutely right.
He did some things. He sought out some things that other people would shy away from.
Yeah.
He's a remarkable guy. I don't know him, did not know him anywhere close to as deeply as you did, but I met him in the State House in 2006, and he changed my life just by watching him live.
Well, to be around him was to be infused with joie de vivre and commitment. One time I was going to vote for something, and I thought, I'm not sure this is really good for my re-election. And he said, you should be ashamed of yourself. I was. He said, that's no reason not to vote for this if you believe in it. I mean, that's just the way he was. You shouldn't be considering that. That's not something you should be thinking about. What a wonderful man. Anyway, thank you all for indulging me on this, Tim, and thanks for chipping in too, Mike. So now we're going to go on to the topic of the hour, which is indeed the work of the World Affairs Council, and to particularly talk about the alarming situation we face in Europe, which it's already affecting us here. You've been to the gas station recently? Especially if you get diesel like I do. Woo! I went by one gas station right next to where I live, which has got diesel. And in one day, the price went up 70 cents for the diesel.
Not to mention heating oil. It's over $4
and
bucks
heating
a
oil
gallon.
and
There's
everything. So
there's a war.
There's
on.
a war
We have
on.
to sacrifice.
But we're paying higher prices. But people in Ukraine are dying and having it far worse than we do. So, Tim, I've taken enough time talking away. Tell us a little bit about yourself and who you are and how you came to be the executive director and your background and so forth.
Sure. So my name is Tim Horgan. I'm the executive director of the World Affairs Council of New Hampshire. Been in that role for about 4 years now, but been with the organization for just over 12, actually. Started off as an AmeriCorps member and spent a year with the organization working on our international visitor exchange programs, and was able to bring up the number of visitors that we were meeting with and bringing to the state. Many of them did meet with Rennie Cushing through his legislative experience. So we have a nice tie to Rennie there as well. But we continued to grow that program and grow the organization. A lot of people are surprised to hear that the World Affairs Council of New Hampshire has been around since 1954 here in the state. But really in the past 10 to 15 years, we've seen a lot of growth, a lot of additional interest in the work that we're doing. And what we tell people is that we really have sort of 3 hats that we wear in order to fulfill our mission of promoting the widest possible understanding of global affairs. And those hats include our speakers programs, which bring in expert speakers from around the country to the state of New Hampshire to talk about these top global issues, to talk about what's going on in Ukraine, to talk about U.S.-China relations, to talk about the wars in Ethiopia, conflicts around the world, and even simple everyday things such as the extremely complex global supply chain challenges that we've been seeing, and we're focusing a number of our programs on this spring on that topic. We also do an international visitor exchange program. So prior to the pandemic, we had about 275 to 300 up-and-coming leaders from around the world visit New Hampshire to have meetings with their professional counterparts, to meet with everyday people, visit people's homes, have dinner with them, share a meal, and really get people to better understand what the U.S. is really like, what the people in New Hampshire are like. One of my favorite misconceptions came from a group from Japan that was dead set with their belief that the moment our parents became eligible to go to the nursing home, we all put them there and never went to go visit them. So they were so happy to see that people actually cared about their parents and family, and not exactly sure where that misconception came from.
Well, that's
but
a pretty damaging misconception.
yeah, it's not the greatest view to have. So that's a great program. And then we also have our Academic World Quest, which is a global high school trivia challenge. We're actually hosting our first one in person in 2 years on Sunday at Southern New Hampshire University. And we've got teams from across the state coming to
And
compete.
what is that again? I kind of.
So that is the Academic World Quest.
Uh-huh.
It's part of a nationwide global academic challenge through the World Affairs Councils of America. And so we will be hosting the New Hampshire State Competition on Sunday, and the winner of that will get to go down to Washington, D.C. and compete against about 45 different teams from across the country.
So does every state have a World Affairs Council? Is that something that's common across this country?
Yeah, there are about 90 different World Affairs Councils across the U.S., so we're the only one here in New Hampshire, but some of the larger states, California, Texas,
Yeah.
Florida, have multiple councils.
Yeah, really
Tim,
good.
who is the New Hampshire World Affairs Council? Is there a board of trustees? Is it a think tank of academics?
Mm-hmm.
Is it a group of business owners who are interested in trade? Who is there a membership in the public? Describe, besides yourself.
Sure.
Who are they?
Yeah, so the World Affairs Council of New Hampshire is a nonpartisan, nonprofit membership organization. So we have about 250 members who actively support us, and a much wider group of people who come to our events and engage with our international visitors. But we have a board of directors that is made up of people from across the state, North Sutton, all the way out to the Seacoast area. And so we really draw upon a wide range of people to come to our events. But really we have a small staff of 5 people at this point, and we are trying to bring people in from around the world even. For our speakers programs that have now gone online since the start of the pandemic, we have had people from 120 different countries view our events and from, I think, 40 or 45 different states as well. We also have our Global in the Granite State podcast, which is a monthly podcast where we bring in another expert speaker to talk about a top issue. So for International Women's Month, we had 2 speakers out of Harvard who had done some really interesting research on why authoritarians fear women, and the end result, not to spoil the episode itself, but the end result is that when you have a broad spectrum of people across the country protesting and demanding the removal of an authoritarian, and they're very inclusive of women, these protests are much more successful in the ultimate goal of regime change. And so,
Boy, that's really interesting. Tim, you brought us a little short video, which this might be a good time to do that. Can you put that video up for us, Brendan?
There's so much going on around the
kinda
world
cap
today
off this.
that it is sometimes hard to keep up. When foreign newsrooms are being cut every year, and with the rise of state-sponsored disinformation, it can be hard to know where to turn in order to understand these complex global issues. This is where the World Affairs Council of New Hampshire comes in. We are your trusted source for access to experts in the field who can break down international stories into bits we can all understand. Whether you are hearing from a former ambassador or meeting with up-and-coming leaders from around the world, you can be sure that these authentic experiences will make you a stronger global citizen. Just as it is important for you to know what is going on in your city, state, and country, the world beckons for your attention, and we are here to guide you. With your support, we can all build a more peaceful world. Donate or join today.
Very good, Tim. Thanks for bringing that to
Yeah, I
us.
recognize the voice of the narrator.
well, when you're a small nonprofit, you don't get to hire the big name voice actors, so you end up with
That was a
what
very
you got.
good video, and it did give us a flavor of the activities that you guys engage in. And the fact that you've been around longer than I've been alive since 1954 really is remarkable. And I'm going to take that and I'm going to segue it, because what was going on in 1954 is the Cold War. The communist bloc was tightening. We had Eisenhower, I believe, by that time was president.
We had Joe McCarthy, too,
and
with the hysteria over that.
The Red Scare, and here we are once again. Not necessarily red; they're the red, white, and blue now, apparently, or the white, blue, and red, or whatever they are. But we're facing Russia once again.
Yeah, and I was just checking out the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists as I was waiting to come in here. I guess probably everybody knows what the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists is. It's a magazine that was founded by atomic scientists that helped develop the atomic bomb.
But most of us know what it is, but we don't read it like Bob does.
Well, I don't read it, but I look at the clock on the cover, because ever since they started publishing that, going back to, I'm sure it goes back to the 1950s, they've had
Little minute hand.
this doomsday clock. How many minutes till midnight? And midnight is when Armageddon happens and nuclear war is unleashed. And it's varied up and down. I think at the very best of times it was like 10 minutes to midnight, back when we had nuclear arms limitations with the former Soviet Union. Most of them have now gone away. And right now it's 100 seconds, less than 2 minutes to midnight, according to their clock. And that brings us back what I really want to talk to Tim about, the war in the Ukraine. I mean, who would have thought that we would have a war involving attacks on operating and closed nuclear plants? Chernobyl, I was fond of saying, so the Russians invaded Ukraine and they got Chernobyl. What the hell is second prize?
How did I know Bob Backus was going to go to the nuke plants? The rest of us are looking at children in bunkers and mothers with carriages.
Well,
Bob is
the
going
nuke
to where
plant,
the
the
real
nukes plant could
hazard is.
wreak the damage.
I'm not disputing
way
that, but
beyond anything we've seen.
of all the
and
people
what
on
we've
the
seen is
planet
bad.
that would go there, it's Bob Backus.
Yeah. Anyway, I'd like to talk to you about your perception, your insights into what's happening in the Ukraine. And I want to start out by being a little bit provocative, and I'm going to ask you: all we hear is our side of this, which is allied totally with the Ukrainians. We're all, I got my Ukrainian thing right here, but we never hear about Russia. And I heard the other day that Putin said that if Ukraine will acknowledge that Crimea is properly part of Russia, and the two very eastern provinces that are already kind of under control of Russian supporters should be part of, not part of Ukraine, that he's willing to call off the war. And I thought to myself, well, why wouldn't President Zelensky, who was become the Ukrainian Churchill, why wouldn't he have to think about that?
Well, and I'm sure he has had to think about that. It's certainly not anything that he wanted coming into this role as president. As a former comedian and entertainer, I'm sure he was not really looking forward to an invasion of his country.
But a man who took up a mantle when it was called for.
He has, definitely.
And I'm even before that to go and run for the office using social media. I mean, this was a time when corruption was rampant in the Ukraine, and he brought sunshine. Or at least that was.
At least he tried to. I don't know how
that's
much
what he
succeeded.
campaigned on.
Yeah.
So I mean, a lot of people are saying he treating him like this clown.
Right.
But who knew? But he was a clown that took some very serious steps long before Russia was mounting an offensive on his borders.
He did, and he's been on the international stage for.
He had to fight off Trump. Don't forget.
It was a perfect call, I'm told. But I mean, it is interesting that this is. A perfect segue into the idea that this is not a new invasion. This is something that has been going on since at least 2014 when Russia invaded Crimea, annexed it. This is something that...
And it appeared to get away with it. There were some sanctions, but nothing that really was going to change the result.
And this is... where we find ourselves today is that we are trying sanctions, and this is a deeper sanctions regime than has ever been unleashed, I think. So we'll have to see what happens here, but sanctions have not stopped Putin before. He has continued to push forward. I'm not making any statement as to whether or not...
sanctions ever stopped anybody?
Right.
The only example I can think of, and this goes back a long way, but I go back a long way, was southern Rhodesia when it was an apartheid regime, and Great Britain imposed sanctions on Rhodesia, which did upend the apartheid white leadership of that country, which is now, what the hell is it? Zambia? No, that's northern Rhodesia. I can't remember.
Yeah.
Whatever southern Rhodesia is now, it's not that anymore.
Yeah.
That's the only time I can think, and that's a pretty different thing.
Sure.
Well, go ahead.
Well, I was reading an interesting study from 2009 that was done on exactly this topic of whether or not sanctions actually work. And if you look at the overall goals of sanctions and whether or not they achieve them, only about 34% of the time does that actually achieve its goal.
That's more than I would have guessed.
Well, it really depends on what the goal is.
It depends on your definition of success, too, I'm sure.
Right. So if your goal is to stop a Russian oligarch from being corrupt and selling money laundering, those sanctions can be very effective because you can freeze their assets and they can't move their money around. So those tend to be closer to 50% successful. The ones that aim to get regime change or to stop a war, those have not been successful in the past. And so, you really have to it really depends on what you're looking at as your end goal.
But in this situation, we have almost a hybrid of those two, because we have a state and a regime which is an oligarchy. And while we have imposed sanctions, they were this kind of sanction. I mean, we're Germany seizing yachts.
Yep.
They're shutting down pipelines. These are sanctions that, for the first time in my lifetime, look real to me. The others were really feathers as far as I was concerned.
Well, I think particularly, Mike, now that President Biden has said we're not going to accept any oil from Russia.
That's a whole other topic I'd like to get to.
Well, sure. That's part of this topic, I think. But go ahead.
Well, I mean, it is. It's. I mean, but we're 10% of our oil supply.
But it operates in the world market, so I don't know.
Well, and we see that when you fill up your gas tank, I guess. But
Yeah.
what I was trying to say is just kind of to try to point out or see if you agree that it looks like this is a situation where if these effective sanctions against oligarchs, which are 50% effective, can translate into their defecting from support of Putin. That's really the question,
Right.
isn't it? It's a leverage issue because you're not, I mean, they're sanctioning Putin personally, but he's got the whole country. And, you're not really going to touch him that way. But these other oligarchs who like their London real estate, who like their super yachts in the Mediterranean. These things are getting seized. These bank accounts are getting locked up. They took the step of taking them off the SWIFT program. These guys, I mean, you're hitting them in the pocketbook, and
yeah, I mean,
doesn't that stand a better chance of being effective?
So yes, it does. I think you're seeing the ruble has lost 90% of its value in the past 2 weeks. You've seen the yachts and the apartments.
I really don't think the oligarchs got their bank accounts in rubles, though. It's the Russian people are being harmed by that.
That's true. But at the same time, you see Russian banks are really locking down the ruble and making it so that people can't convert to foreign currencies.
Yeah.
But the thing is whether or not these are going to be long-term sanctions, and is the West going to be willing to pay the price at the gas pump with commodities such as wheat, palladium, these big industrial metals that come out of this region? Is the West going to keep the sanctions regime up for an extended period of time? And what Putin is most likely betting on is that we won't. We'll lose interest. We'll not be willing to pay $5 a gallon at the gas pump for a long time. We'll forget about it. The West is notorious for a short.
We don't know how that's going to come out. He could be right. I don't know.
He could be. But the hope is that these sanctions get calibrated to just that tipping point, to just below that tipping point, so that they do remain strong. But with this oil, you see the UK, you see the US, Canada willing to take that step, but the rest of Europe has not yet been willing to take that step.
But, I have to say, I've been very impressed by Germany's leadership under Angela Merkel and now the new German Chancellor Stolz. They have this pipeline, this Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which bypassed Ukraine, and it was all physically completed and ready to turn on, and they said no. And the Russian petroleum exports are far more important to Germany than they are to us.
They are.
That was pretty gutsy, I would think.
It was, yeah, certainly.
Do you think they can maintain that and do it? Meanwhile, they're shutting down their nuclear plants, which is controversial. But I certainly think it was the right decision. But that's just me, not maybe just me. I hope. But in any event, I have to say, one of the things that's come out of this that people have commented on, I'd be interested in your comment. Everybody's been surprised, maybe really pleasantly surprised, by the revival of the strength of unity in the Western Alliance, and particularly NATO and the European Union.
Yeah, I think that Putin was calculating that NATO was in shambles, that there was no unity amongst nations. We saw for the past several years a straining of that relationship.
A deliberate attempt to take it apart.
Yes,
you probably
led by our own former president.
You've seen a strain of that relationship, and you've seen a strain on the European Union. You saw Brexit occur just a few years ago. There were a number of other countries that were talking about whether or not the European Union was a good thing to be in anymore. But yes, the West has come together in a very strong way that I don't think Putin expected. I think he was expecting a weak response from the West and expecting to take over Ukraine in just a couple of days, and that has not turned out to be a very good prediction on his part.
I wanted to point out, too, Germany made a major policy change with regard to its military. And if you'd like to talk about that, I'd like to be educated. But as far as I know, this is an about-face from almost utter demilitarization. There's ups and downs of all of that, but this is a major policy shift for a major European country. How does that impact the future?
Yeah, you've seen since World War II a real national shame for Germany. People do not fly German flags the way that you see flags here in America because they don't want that association to that sort of nationalism, patriotism, because of their history. And so they have not been willing to spend a lot of money on a military. They did not want to ever send arms or money into a conflict zone.
Any conflict.
And this has been a real turning point for them. You saw the German Bundestag stand up and applaud when this passed, that they were going to be willing to send arms into conflict zones, into Ukraine. So, again, this is something that I don't think Putin really counted on. He counted on Germany to be so reliant on their gas and oil that they wouldn't shut down Nord Stream 2.
I think that was stunning.
They were reliant on the West and NATO and Germany. You see the EU providing arms now as well, which is something that they had a policy against up until this point.
Yeah.
So this has been really a massive shift in the global order, and we'll have to see what the unintended consequences down the line are.
But no small sacrifice either. Each one of these countries that are doing these things, there's cost involved with every single one of these things.
And I think the
say
cost for
that
many of them
here-
are much more than they are for us with our higher
That's
prices.
exactly why I'm saying
yeah,
that.
I think that's
we
right.
have to. Do we really stand behind these people, or is it just lip service, or are we willing to?
Yeah.
Time will tell. I mean, I think the interest that we've seen from the news media, from the American public, has shown that there may be a long-term interest in this and preventing Russia from doing it, continuing these types of actions. We've seen back in 2008 the invasion of Georgia, back in 2014 the first invasion of Ukraine. And as Bob said, it was weak reactions. It was, we'll sanction you and tell you, shame on you for doing that, but nothing, as what we're seeing today. And this obviously is a much bigger military operation, a much bigger invasion than what we've seen in the past. But we are seeing a much more resounding response to what Russia has done here.
So Thomas Friedman wrote a column, maybe you saw it yesterday or today in the Times, and he raised the alarming prospect, how is Putin going to react to all this? He is a total dictator. He is the most recent czar, or, successor to Stalin, whatever. He is. He stifled all domestic opposition, all opportunities for freedom
Television stations are going off the air in
you know,
protest.
if they're not, it's not that. I mean, people in Russia don't even understand they're invading another country, apparently. But if he sees this and he sees what's happening, what's he going to do? I mean, he can't afford to lose this war, and he can't see a way to win it.
Yeah.
That's what scares me. An irrational response when he put the nuclear forces in Russia on alert. Oh my God! I mean, that's what the most alarming thing in the face of the world.
It's working. That's a tactic that we should be prepared for, and I cannot believe that it's working as well as it is, quite frankly.
Yeah.
Because we're very flat-footed. But I get to Bob's question. Where's the off-ramp?
So how do we get out of this
Right.
without having this damn war expand and maybe threaten the whole world?
I mean, it really depends on what you believe Putin's state of mind to be right now.
Well, can I add something to the topic? I'm sorry, I'm really piling on, but I mean they're accusing him of war crimes. So okay, you make peace, and then we're going to hang you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean,
that's kind of putting a roadblock on the off ramp, isn't it?
there are a lot of challenges. It's certainly a complex issue, but I think one of the things to really try and understand, and I don't think a lot of people really do understand right now, even people who follow Putin and have followed him for a long time, is what his state of mind is. He's been holed up in his presidential palace by himself. You see these meetings with Macron.
The 20-foot table with everybody at one end and he all alone. I mean, that's a powerful visual.
So what I'm hearing is that he is just isolated. People are very concerned about what his state of mind is.
Which makes him very, very dangerous, in my opinion.
Well,
we got a call.
We have a caller. Caller, go ahead. You're live on the Progress Report. Thanks for calling. What do you have to say?
Hi guys, great show tonight. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I wish you'd talk about the poor performance of the Russian ground troops. What does that tell us? What are we learning from that? And of course, they have nukes to back them up if it ever came to a huge ground war. But it seems to me that Russian ground troops are
not what we thought they were.
Yeah.
Well, I think the big...
Thanks for the call, Tony.
That's a really good question. Thank you.
I think the big thing to note here is there are a couple of different ways to answer this question. So, first, you see a lot of their military equipment breaking down. Even before the invasion, you saw a day or two before a lot of vehicles being moved away, and Russia was claiming, well, we're done with our exercises, so we're moving these home. Now what we were hearing is actually they were just moving away all of the stuff that had already broken down. So that's not a good start to what you're getting into. Secondly, Russia relies heavily on conscripts. They do not have an all-volunteer fighting force in the way that the U.S. does. So you have a lot of people who had no idea that they were going to fight in Ukraine. They were hearing that they were just on exercises.
Against people, many of whom are Russian speakers.
And Putin was out there saying, these are our brothers. We're coming to liberate them from the neo-Nazis and the anti-Semites, which is quite comical when Zelensky is Jewish himself. But you see that there's just not the morale. A lot of what we're hearing is not a lot of morale, not a lot of preparation for a longer-term sustained attack that we're seeing them need. I think a lot of what we were hearing from both the West and from Russia was that if there was an attack, it would be over quickly. 48 hours was generally the number people were picking.
Shock and awe. They stole our slogan.
Exactly. And so, I don't think Putin and his military forces were prepared for a longer-term attack. And so there's lack of food, there's lack of fuel, there's lack of vehicles that have the maintenance.
And you're getting to something that I was about to mention. I understand, and I'm hearing it from what everyone else is watching on the news and the news that you can get, that the corruption in the Russian military also had a big part to play, because a lot of the money that was supposed to be spent on food and fuel and parts was eaten up by corrupt military personnel.
The problem Ukraine had to some degree too, although perhaps it's better under Zelensky than it was under his predecessors.
But you have for Ukraine the morale boost of fighting for your home country, of fighting for your home, for the people who live around you, rather than going to some other country where you don't even understand what the objectives are, because Putin hasn't even been clear on what the objectives are. I don't know if you guys saw his late night speech after, or the readouts from those just before the invasion.
I heard about it.
But the overall sentiment was that Ukraine has never been a country, and it's never, it was only a part of Russia, and we gave it away through stupid maneuvers based on former Russian leaders. He eviscerated Lenin and all of this. And so it's just all of these weird things that he put out there. So it's not even clear what his end goal is. I mean, he claims that it's just simply to stop the genocide. Or wait, no, it's to get rid of the neo-Nazis.
Well, isn't his goal number one to ensure that Ukraine never joins NATO?
I think that is definitely a big part of it. But I think he viewed this as in a number of ways, a easy win. Something that he could sell as, oh, look at how strong I am, to his domestic audience, because to Putin, that is the most important audience, is the domestic audience, because he needs to either keep them happy or keep them terrified. And going out and saving Russian brethren in another country who are under a genocide, which there has not been any proof of, but when you are fed a certain state-led media diet, you're going to potentially be more apt to believe what you're being fed.
We have another phone call.
This is nice to see.
Go ahead,
Hi,
caller.
caller.
You're live on the Progress Report.
Hi there. Go ahead.
Can I go in the air?
Yes,
Yes,
you
you
can.
are.
You're live on the air right now.
Welcome.
Okay, I think Putin is a big bully. And I think the way things are going now, we're going to probably see more countries being invaded in Europe. And I think we're going to go into a third world war, conventional weapons, because I don't think Putin wants to wipe out the world. And like I said, he's got a plan. He's got an end game. And I don't know what that is, but his government is kind of slipping away because of the sanctions we're doing on those rich Russian people. And if he loses the popularity of the elite,
Russian people, he may have to quiet down considerably. Tell me what you think of this.
Thank you. Thank you for the call.
Thank you. That's a great call, and it's something I certainly wanted to raise. Is Putin, suppose he achieves somehow some objective he has in mind in Ukraine, whatever that might be, which seems increasingly likely. Will he stop at Ukraine?
So this, I think, is really interesting. I think that initially, if there was no strong response, which he expected the West to maybe slap a few more sanctions on him and call it a day, if there was an effective Russian fighting force that could have actually achieved their goals in a reasonable amount of time, then yes, I would be more worried about an expansion of this war. But
particularly to Moldova, which is not part of NATO and is on Ukraine's border in the west.
Exactly, and you see, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia wanting to become
They are NATO countries.
They want to become more involved. They want to get into the EU, etc. And Finland
filed their application.
Yeah, and so I think this is truly backfired. And I think if you expect, unless NATO does something to attack Russia, or they get involved some way. Or a rocket ends up hitting in Poland because if you believe what Russia is saying, that they don't target civilian areas, you have to just assume that they're really terrible shots. So maybe something does spill over into Poland in that way. But I don't think Putin can have a lot of confidence in his military right now that they could take on NATO, even in one of the smaller countries. You see over 100,000 American troops in NATO countries now, plus all the troops that those NATO countries are supplying. You see a ramping up of these things. So I can't see a way in which Putin, unless the reports or the theories that he's just completely lost it, I don't see a way in which he moves this beyond Ukraine. I think he's lucky to achieve anything in Ukraine if it's not, what I view more of as just him calling it quits and going home.
Well, go ahead. What really seems to bug Putin more than anything is NATO. He really seems to be bugged by NATO. And, we did move NATO up to the borders of this, beyond the borders, what was the Soviet Union, right to the borders of Russia, particularly with the admission of the three Baltic states, Lithuania, Estonia, and Latvia, as members of NATO. I've always wondered about the wisdom of that. Do we really want to have the whole NATO alliance, including us, go to war if there's a Russians make an invasion or an incursion into Latvia? Mm-hmm. Do we want to do that?
We do now.
I don't think we want to do it even now.
Well, then we ought to get out of NATO. Bob, if that's our sentiment, then what are we doing?
But this could lead to the nuclear Armageddon we've all been so lucky to avoid since 1945.
You got to honor your treaties, Bob.
I think
at the expense of incinerating the world. I don't know.
Got to honor your treaties.
I think there's a critical point here in that. We don't always get to choose where we engage. We don't always get to choose.
We get to choose who we put into NATO.
We do, and I think,
they're in. It is. And I'm wondering, I'm asking, I'm wanting to debate with you guys. Was that smart?
So I can't speak to the policy of NATO. I have not been around long enough to know the intricacies of whether or not it was a good idea. But what I can tell you is what I've heard from people who are much smarter than me is that, yes, if we went back to 2008 and didn't make a promise to Ukraine that someday down the line we would maybe consider allowing them to join.
In exchange for you giving up all your nuclear weapons, don't forget.
Well, that happened earlier. That happened back in the fall of the Soviet Union. So Ukraine at the fall of the Soviet Union, when they got their freedom in 91, I believe it was, they made a pact with the U.S. and Russia that they would give up their nuclear weapons in exchange for security guarantees from both the USSR, Russia, and the U.S. So in fact, what's happening right now is Russia is breaking their promise to Ukraine of providing for their security by giving up their nuclear
I
arms.
say you got to honor your treaties.
You also can say, Russia has made the complaint, well, the U.S. promised that NATO would not move 1 inch closer to Russia when the Soviet Union fell. And what actually happened there was a promise or a conversation held between the USSR and the U.S. that was never officially ratified. There was never officially a promise given. But in Putin's mind, it was a promise given or a convenient thing he could talk about in order to say why he needs to go to war in Ukraine. So in terms
Sounds like a diplomatic gaffe to me.
Well,
I mean, these things happen.
Yes. From what I've gathered, when that offer was brought back to President Bush, the elder, he was like, "What are you talking about? We're not making that promise." So yes, diplomatic gaffes happen. Diplomatic misunderstandings happen, and it's unfortunate, but there was never anything written into a treaty or written down that said NATO will never expand. So in terms of the expansion of NATO, my issue that I take when people say, well, NATO shouldn't expand and this is really NATO's fault, which I'm not saying is what Bob is saying here, but...
Well, I'm suggesting it. I mean, as people say, what would we think if the Warsaw Pact, which was the Soviet Union's pact with the Eastern European, what if they decided to include Mexico in the Warsaw Pact? How would we react to that?
And I understand that.
We blame them. I mean, that's the question is why is that happening? We're screwing up.
Well, and what I would say is that Russia has been given many, many opportunities to join the liberal international order, to be friendly.
They were never offered an opportunity to join NATO, were they?
They were not, but they were part of the G8, now the G7. They were allowed into the World Trade Organization. They were given many opportunities, the diplomatic resets with multiple administrations, and what I contend is that if Putin was a less authoritarian leader, if he was more willing to be a part of the international order, if he was more willing to play on friendly terms with NATO, NATO would have no reason to want to contain him, to try and put sanctions on him for the aggressive actions he's taken abroad, for the poisoning of his own citizens in other countries. It's not like we're talking about the UK or we're talking about some other country that has been very friendly with the West. We're talking about a country that has had a very controversial and confrontational relationship with the West. So it makes sense that we are in this situation. I think that we can say, well, if NATO hadn't moved west, or east, Putin wouldn't feel this way. But I don't think that's true. I think Putin has this view that Russia is a superpower, not a second-class power as he feels they have been treated, and that they need more respect on the international stage, and they're not getting it. And his only way of getting respect, in his mind, is through hard power.
Well, don't get me wrong, I hold no brief for Putin. I mean,
Sure.
I know he's a KGB guy, he's a murderer, he's a bully, he's just an arrogant dictator. But I can understand a bit of his view of why Russia feels affronted by what's happened.
Well, let me ask this then, Bob. Putin says, I'm moving into Ukraine because I don't want NATO on my borders. But when he gets into Ukraine, he's going to have NATO on his borders. Where's the logic in that?
Well, his claim would be that he doesn't want to occupy Ukraine. He just wants to remove the government and put in
He wants a pro-Russian government.
He wants a pro-Russian government, but he's claiming he wants a neutral country. He wants a buffer zone.
Yeah.
Whether or not you can believe him, again, is up for everyone to decide. I think based on some of the comments he's made, it leads me to believe, at least, that what he says is not always what we need to believe.
Yeah.
But I think, he very much is a revisionist in history. He claims that the fall of the Soviet Union was the greatest catastrophe of the 20th century.
Geographic and political catastrophe of the 20th century.
You can see why he would be of that mindset. Of course, Russia is a very proud country. They have a long history. But is that truly...
I don't think we've ever given Russia its due in many ways. World War II. we claim that D-Day was the turning point in Europe in World War II. It wasn't. It was Stalingrad.
Sure.
8 out of every 10 German casualties were incurred on the Eastern Front, not fighting in Africa or, Italy or in France. 8 out of 10. And, by the time we invaded France on June 4th, 1944, the Red Army had been pushing the Russians back for 2 years, starting with Stalingrad and going on, and they'd been consistently on the offensive. So, and we always say, why don't the Russians come to our D-Day celebrations? Why don't we go to celebrate their victory at Stalingrad? We've never done it. I don't think we've given the Russians their due for the defeat of Nazism. Now, they had a totalitarian example of their own. Who wanted Stalin running the world? That would be even perhaps worse than Hitler did.
Sure.
I'm trying to figure what is Bob looking for? A parade with Stalin coming down Washington. What do they deserve?
I just think we should acknowledge what the Russians accomplished by defeating Hitler to a far greater extent
as someone who studied
we in the
history in
Brits
college, I can tell you that in college they do teach that. We do learn that the Eastern
And I still
Front
say we never send any American president to celebrate the victory at Stalingrad, and we get real pissed when they don't send a
they
Russian.
were communists. We couldn't send our president there. I mean, we were in a cold war.
Well, they were communists when they were fighting the Nazis too.
Well, we can't send our president to, I don't know.
I mean, we have supported.
Maybe today we could have done it. Or
We
maybe
could have done it.
yesterday
We could have done it when Gorbachev and we had Glasnost and Perestroika and all of that. We could have done it. We never did. I just think we've made a lot of mistakes ourselves. If we some way acknowledge the Russian contribution to the victory in World War II, it would have helped.
I think that yes, that's true. I just view Putin coming into power as the biggest challenge to Russia integrating more into the world. And if there were, what I say is I don't know enough about Alexei Navalny to say whether or not he is a good person and would be a good leader for Russia. But the fact that you are
He ain't
poisoning.
gonna get that chance.
Right, you're poisoning these guys is showing you're not really interested.
We have another caller. Welcome to the Progress Report, caller. Join the
Hey
conversation.
guys, it's Tony again. I got another question for you.
Okay, Tony.
Is it possible for Putin to be accepted into the civilized world again after this episode? I look forward to your comment.
Good question. That's
Boy,
kind of my question. I mean, they're calling him a war criminal.
That's another really good question.
He has no
But
offering.
we've done business with some lousy people in this country. We've done business with people who are miserable treatment of their own people. We've done it a lot.
Some lousy people leading our country.
We don't have entirely clean hands ourselves in our foreign relations.
I mean, one thing that I would point.
You can't talk like that. The law says you can't talk like that. That's bad mouthing America.
Well, we don't live in Russia, and that's why those news organizations are going off.
We don't live in Florida.
But I would point to, and it's a good question from Tony, but I would point to Nicolas Maduro. For the past 4 or 5 years, the Maduro regime in Venezuela has been under very strict sanctions for their human rights issues, for their... he is indicted in New York for drug trafficking charges. There are Human Rights International Criminal Court cases ongoing against him. And just recently you've seen, with the spike in oil prices and the banning of Russian oil imports and energy imports into the U.S., the U.S. is now talking to Maduro and talking about ways we might be able to bring him back in. So I would never say
Saudi
never.
Arabia. I mean, we deal with Saudi Arabia. I mean, the president's son-in-law was living there for a couple of years, I think.
And we talk about our wonderful friends in Russia and Saudi Arabia and Venezuela, and what do they all have? They all have oil. And so this, to me, is really pointing to the fact that it was something that we've known for a very long time, but perhaps maybe the 6th or 7th time we learn our lesson, that these places that we're relying on so heavily for oil and for energy are not our friends. You see MBS in Saudi Arabia demanding that before they put any additional oil out, that we recognize him as the true leader of Saudi Arabia, which is something that the Biden administration has not done.
Well,
We're being
given that
held
he was
over the
responsible
literal
for-
barrel.
for the murder of
Right.
an American citizen and a
He
Washington
wasn't a
Post.
citizen, but he was a resident.
He was a resident. That they brutally murdered him in the consulate in Istanbul at apparently the Sheikh's express orders. I mean, how much can we put up with it?
Yeah,
If
right.
we
Put up
can,
with
if we
plenty.
can put up with him to get some more oil, we should be able to put up with something from Putin. I don't know. I mean, to get an off ramp to end the threat of a wider war and possibly a nuclear war, which is the horror of all horrors that we must avoid. I think it's been a miracle we've
No,
avoided.
you can't avoid it. You got to win it, Bob.
You can't win that war. There's no winning that war. I don't think so. I mean, I don't.
Well,
don't think so.
I don't think that. I think the West is doing better than I expected with their sanctions, but I do not like the cowering. If they did not have a counter move planned for his opening gambit in this chess game, then we have to replace them with people who can come up with counter moves, because we are right now, we're pinned like a bug on wax, and I don't think that that's where we should be.
So this is going really fast, isn't it, Tim? And I'm delighted we've got these great calls coming in. What do you see as the best possible way out of this thing without immolating the whole world in nuclear warfare, or even a giant conventional warfare in all of Europe? How do we get out of this?
I mean, the best possible outcome is Putin comes to what we believe to be his senses and ends the war and removes his troops and goes home.
Yeah.
There's nothing that is forcing him to
Do
do
you think
this.
he can do that without losing power?
I
And if they can't do it without losing power, can he do it?
I'm not enough of a Russian expert to know whether or not that is possible, but I think that is the best of all worlds, is that
Yeah.
he makes that decision, and consequences at home for him be what they may, because he is the one who decided to take this action. Nobody forced his hand here
No,
to
that's
invade
true.
Ukraine.
That's certainly true.
Now, is that a realistic expectation? Probably not. You know,
Well,
I think
What's
there
the best realistic possibility if that's not realistic?
there are a couple of options, I think, and it really depends on where things go. So if the West does continue to pound Russia with these sanctions, and the sanctions remain in place, and the Russian economy continues to fall apart, the oligarchs may turn. You know, they are there to support Putin, because he gives them benefits that enrich them. If they can't engage in the world, if they can't keep their super yachts, they can't keep their houses in London, then there is a real chance that they turn on him and install someone else. Now, is that going to be a good result? We don't know. We don't know who would be
The devil
installed.
you know, the devil
I
you
just
don't.
want a result that doesn't end in a wider war and a possibility of a nuclear war.
Yeah, I mean, you can get to that point by having Russia take over Ukraine and decapitate the government and say, okay, we're good, now we're pulling back. That is a realistic possibility. I mean, Ukraine cannot hold out forever.
The only thing that would be worse than that would be all-out nuclear war. That
Yeah.
would be the ultimate horror. We may none of us may survive that. It's just I'm just really, really scared. I've never seen anything like this. Not only do we have a nuclear arm with major nuclear arms in Russia, which is where all the nuclear arms from Belarus and Ukraine were sent, Kazakhstan too. They were all sent there. We have that. You know, a guy cornered like Putin, who doesn't want to lose face, doesn't want to lose power, it's just really, really, really creepy. And I just hope we've got a lot of smart people really working to figure out how we get this, somehow get this past this. I admire.
I join you in that call for smart people.
I don't. I think what Biden has done, and the help of the leaders of the Western democracies, has been really terrific, and putting together a strong.
The intelligence work before this attack really blunted any disinformation that might have gotten out there. I think that really was the real victory in what the United States did to help Ukraine.
Yeah.
Well, and I want to talk a little bit more about the potential for nuclear war. Of course, that's a huge issue.
In 30 seconds.
Yeah, just to point out that what does this mean for countries who are not in NATO? Do they now decide that they need to get
Yeah.
nuclear arms because they are next to Russia.
Does Zelensky or maybe some other in the Ukraine say, maybe we should have kept those nuclear weapons?
Exactly. So I think it's an interesting unintended
Or
potential
Iran.
consequence.
Yeah. We're out of time. Tim, this has
All
gone
right.
extremely well. We're so pleased you could join us.
Thank you very much.
You've been an excellent informant to inform us about these things. And I urge people to consider supporting the World Council on World Affairs Council. And he says all their programs are on their website recently since the pandemic. You can get them, and there's some
Music's playing,
excellent
Bob.
ones. Okay, we're gone. See you next week, folks. Thank you.